Now for a look behind the headlines.
Welcome to Don't Shout at the Telly with me, your host Lalana Keith. Joining me on the sofa tonight, I have Naomi, who would like to be a commissioning editor, Salma, who wants to do something in the business sector, Nathan, a gap year student, Joe, a librarian, and Saliha, a copywriter who would like to be a novelist. So this month has been absolutely overwhelmed in the press with the American elections.
A lot of the coverage has been very sort of celebratory of the fact that he is a black man. America's got its first black president, and this is a major historic achievement, which in many ways, you know, that's correct. I mean, you know, I think 30, 40 years ago, there's no chance he would have ever had a look in. So things have come a long way, and that's definitely something to celebrate, but it's as if people who celebrate Obama's race and the fact that he's president are doing so because they're trying to prove something about themselves, and show themselves off to be really progressive types.
It's actually showing us up as being less able to deal with race because he's not actually being judged on his policies or who he is. Even it's just like giving people this snobbery that they can finally go, yes, I'm proud to be American, we voted in a black man, but he's actually a black man who's going to not necessarily help policies be more equal altogether.
I think as well a lot of his policies, when you actually look at them, are quite questionable in the first place. I mean, he says he's going to pull out of Iraq, but he's going to increase troops in Afghanistan, and he's noted to be in favour of interventions further afield. So in Pakistan, it's a country that's been bandied about quite a lot. Americans already intervened in Pakistan, and I think, you know, the right response to that is kind of outrage. I mean, how dare they? And he's going to continue with these sort of humanitarian interventions.
Yeah, and I mean, Joe, I'm just thinking, I mean, who voted for him in Pakistan and Afghanistan, you know? And the Africans are going to love his democracy,
well,
aren't
exactly.
they?
Nothing's really changed, despite all this rhetoric of change and yes, we can. I mean, what is going to change? He's
taking on, like you were saying, the white man's burden. It's so many foreign policy interventions all the time, and that's what causes so many of these crises to begin with. And then, I mean, just because he's putting a black face on it, now people are going to welcome it. It's still just completely arrogant. And at the same time, we've got this all going on with Sarah Palin as well.
I think a lot of people were sort of picking them more up, not on the policies that Sarah Palin has, but sort of her general attitude, sort of like how she is as a person and things like that. And I think they also picked up on sort of making fun of her as well, like the whole Pitbull with the lipstick, she was a hockey mum and things like that. So it was very much jokey, making her look like basically a pillock. But,
yeah, but I think it was more sinister than that, because like she said a lot of things which deserves people to take the piss out of her, which is fine. But that's not really the point when it's like feminists turning around starting to slag her off because she had a child when she was 44. Like, what happened to pro-choice? They're slagging her off because she's anti-abortion, anti-this, anti-contraception, but what, you're actually saying that she shouldn't have had that child and it's her fault? She's got a Down syndrome baby because she had it too old. Like, how are people coming out with that?
I think there's a deep level of double standards as well, because I think satire and caricature has always been a part of political campaigning. I mean, the point is, it's acceptable to dismiss someone as a redneck, yokel, small-town idiot. And, you know, the fact that she's a woman also comes into that. But it's not acceptable to criticise a black man on any level whatsoever, not even on the basis of his policy.
I think some of the things that I've read as well, sort of, one of these things, Matt Damon was saying how he was embarrassed of, you know, Sarah Palin. So obviously he's embarrassed of her, so he basically just like sort of disregards any of her policies. I think that was just kind of ridiculous, and like you don't hear anything of, well, I haven't heard much anyway of the vice president candidate for the Democrats, the Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean that's partly because McCain's probably going to die soon, so she would have been the president as well. So let's see what else people have been reading about.
Yeah, I picked up an article from The Guardian, and it's about what's happening is the government is planning to build zero carbon towns or eco towns, and they've designated 12 sites around the country where they propose to build these towns. Basically, the whole article is about that. You know, this policy is in complete disarray because of campaigning, mainly from green campaigners who are protesting against the building of these towns. And, you know, their argument is basically that, you know, we've got enough cities and towns which has ruined and damaged our ecosystem already. Almost like saying we've got enough people in our country and that's messed it up. And, you know, these campaigners, whether you build green towns, blue towns, I mean, any kind of towns, you know, they're never going to agree to it, you know. The Town and Country Planning Act of 1947, which says that you can own land, but you can't build on it. So, you know, that's this idea that, you know, I'm going to buy a piece of land and preserve it for who? Save it for the earth? I mean, what's the point of that? I mean, it would be nice, wouldn't it, to have our own land, to have wonderful, nice gardens, you know, and all this stuff that we can enjoy.
I think it's completely anti-human to elevate sort of flora and fauna above humans.
The fact of the matter is we need more houses. I mean. That's a real pressing need, you know.
Yeah. People need space, you know.
Okay, what have you been reading about, Salma?
Well, I've picked up an article from Guardian, and it's called Transport for London, the Boris Plan. And basically, it's the plans for the 6-lane road bridge. And what's happening is Boris, the London Mayor, what he's saying now is that I am stopping the deception of keeping hopes alive when there is no funding for these schemes. He's saying that there's not enough funding or enough money to actually go ahead and continue with these. He's deciding to drop the development of like free transport schemes. One of them is the Cross River Tram, the other one is the Docklands Light Railway Extension, and East London River Crossing. But I personally think that if they did continue with it, it would be a good thing, because then it would reduce journey times. It would even make East London more attractive, especially for businesses as well. And it would also like give more job opportunities as Olympics are coming up. But I think like instead of backing away from these plans, which are actually good plans that would be good to go ahead with, instead of backing away from it, he should actually try and argue the points, and then, you know, like back up his own points, instead of just thinking, oh, there's not enough money to fund for these stuff, so, you know, I'm not going to go ahead with it, I'm just going to leave it and drop it.
And fight for some funding and actually push forward with some of his plans.
Yeah.
Boris is basically chickening out of this.
I've been reading through the BBC website and The Guardian, and so there's these new things that they're going to bring in. New plans are drawn up in England so that patients will get the right to pay for top-ups without using their basic NHS healthcare. So top-ups, this applies to new drugs and new treatments which aren't available on the NHS. So usually if you did pay for these yourself, because they're not available in the NHS, this would mean you'd have to forfeit your NHS healthcare. So what they're doing now, there's brought in these new rules, and you can top up basically your NHS buying these new drugs or therapies if you needed them, and you can still get your NHS. This does little for those people who can't afford the top-ups to their healthcare. So these people who can't afford these top-ups, they're probably the people that need more help than anyone else. You know, what happens if you are at a time when you can afford to pay for your top-ups, but then you suddenly get into debt? Like, is the NHS, are they going to then provide you with that drug you were paying for on your top-up and things like that? I think we need to do more to sort of get more drugs available on the NHS. And I also think this kind of gives more power to the drug companies as well, to sort of like dictate how much they charge for drugs. Like, you know, why have this drug on the NHS cheaper when you can have someone, you know, willing to pay for it?
And putting a cost on their lives, I would say, as well. You know?
It's like saying people with more personal means are literally worth more because they can pay for their own survival. Yeah. And talking of drugs as well, I think part of the problem with how expensive they are is because drug companies, once they've researched and developed a drug, have exclusive rights to its manufacture, and so that's why they can charge literally what they want for it. And that's why a lot of these drugs are so expensive. So there's surely something we can do about patenting and kind of loosening the kind of intellectual property restrictions.
Oh, well, I was reading an article on the Guardian website. It's about a £2.5 billion project to build a sewage tunnel running underneath the River Thames. And this is to upgrade the original system so that when there's heavy rainfall, the the sewage isn't overflowing into the river. And the author of the article made a few objections. He admits to actually being a councillor in a particular constituency that would be just bogged down by this massive stinky crater, basically, the size of 2 football pitches, probably in a public park. And his alternative was to increase the fleet of skimmer vessels that pick up trash from the Thames and oxygenate the water for fishes and so on and so forth. And I think this is really indicative of our kind of aversion to major large-scale projects. And this is something I think that was touched on by a recent WORLDwrite production, Flush It. And it's really interesting to see how this kind of attitude is reflected abroad, doing so much more damage than this, which is a rather trivial issue in comparison, when proposing small-scale stopgate measures instead of real solid development.
You mentioned the vessels, that his alternative to building this underground sewer is to have these vessels pick up all the rubbish, which is something similar that they had in the days of the Great Stink. And you know, they got rid of these kind of demeaning jobs and all that kind of stuff, and they said, you know, we need real development right now. So they had it. They had this, you know, big, massive sewer building project, which was absolutely phenomenal as well.
It was an inspiration.
Yeah, and you know, those people had a vision. They knew what they needed, and you know, they went about doing that kind of thing. Whereas now it's just like, oh, noise pollution and all this kind of stuff, you know, and so we can't do it.
On which note, we should probably wrap up our online news channel, which is trying to say something alternative. So, why don't you let us know what you think on the website, Viewers Buyback, and you've been watching Don't Shout at the Telly with me, your host, Lana Keith, and my guest tonight. Thanks very much.
Fascinating stuff, Lilana.